Brazil is home to some of the most scenic locations in the world, such as the Amazon forest, and it's home to over 215 million people. It also brings in over 6 million tourists per year. But what you probably don't know about Brazil is that it's no stranger when it comes to UFO encounters and sightings. And one of these encounters would even go on to inspire Brazil's first first-person shooter game. Some of these UFO encounters in Brazil would happen, such as in 1952, when a photographer and a journalist saw a saucer-like object flying over a beach. The photographer, being a photographer, would snap a photo, and this photo was even published. Or in 1977, when several citizens of Brazil would claim to see these strange glowing orbs in the sky. Not only would they claim to see these strange glowing orbs, but they were said to have been attacked by these strange glowing orbs. The victims of these strange glowing orbs in the sky, they were left with burns and traces of radiation. Soon the Brazilian Air Force would get involved and started an operation named Operation Saucer. Or in 1996, when several residents of a Brazilian small town would claim to see alien-like beings walking among them, and they would even have claims of military personnel transporting these alien-like beings to a local university. Now, this strange incident of events was called the Varginha UFO Incident. Now, I know the name Varginha sounds a little weird. It sounds like another word you may know in English, but just get over it for this video. Now, with the introduction being said, good morning, good evening, or perhaps good night, depending what time you're watching. My name is Stalkeen, and I do want to delve into the conspiracy side of YouTube, and I hope that this UFO video being on my YouTube channel would help me with that. Now, I hope you do like this video and subscribe. With that being said, let's go over some Brazilian UFO incidents and how one of these incidents would eventually create Brazilian's first-person shooter game. So one of these first ever events of Brazil and encounters with UFOs was one I mentioned in my introduction. And this happens all the way back in 1947, July 23rd. Jose C. Higgins was a topographer, and what he was doing in Sao Paulo in 1947, he was with a few colleagues and they were doing their usual work, basically studying the land and making maps, when all of a sudden, from 150 feet away, they all spot something strange in the sky. The object in the sky that Jose and his colleagues spotted was like a lens shape, and when this lens-shaped object landed near them, Jose's colleagues ran away in terror, leaving Jose all alone. Jose would go on to say that he had seen 3 humanoid-like beings emerge from the UFO, and they spoke to him in an unknown language. And when Jose's colleagues gained the courage to go back to where the UFO landed, the UFOs would all of a sudden take off in their spaceship, I guess you could call it. Now, you can choose whether or not to suspend your beliefs in whether UFOs exist or not. I mean, this incident happened all the way back in 1940s, when things weren't heavily documented as they are now. Oh yeah, if you're wondering where I got this from, the source I could find for this event ever happening was a document made by Ted Blocher, an American UFOologist. A UFOologist are people who believe UFOs are linked to extraterrestrial aliens, or someone who studies UFOs. The next UFO sighting I want to talk about that happens in Brazil happened all the way back in 1952, May 5th, when photographer Ed Keffel and journalist João Martin would see a UFO flying in the sky, and they would quickly take 5 photos of this UFO. And in one photo, you can clearly see that it is a UFO, right? These 5 photos that were taken by the two, they were 100% evidence that aliens could exist. I mean, the photos were perfectly clear. Well, maybe. As skeptics would quickly have something to say about this, as something wasn't right in photo 4. The shadows on the foliage indicate lighting from the right, while the light on the object seems to come from the left. The biggest controversy whether or not this was actually a UFO caught on photo was the issue of which angle the light was coming from. The Brazilian Air Force would even conduct their own investigation to find out whether or not these photos were real, and their response would be that these photos are genuine. Mr. Keffel, the photographer from earlier, would later go on to say in a written statement, "Criticism, denial of facts, or discussions by whoever does not know the object, or knows it from a distance or through reading third-hand publications that are usually incorrect, can only be due to intolerance or dishonesty of purpose. As to me, I ignore them, for I am a professional who does not base his career on that report, nor have I the time for lost and sterile debates. I reported merely what I saw, and whatever I had to say has been said." Now personally, I find it a bit difficult to come up with my own conclusion whether or not that these photos are real. I mean, the Brazilian Air Force even said that these photos were genuine, while there were skeptics who said that there was something off about photo 4. But soon enough, in our next UFO reporting, and attacks, we'll find out that the Brazilian military isn't always reliable. Now the next UFO sighting and encounters I want to talk about is one I've mentioned in my introduction, and I really want to talk about this one because this one is really interesting. This is known as Operation Saucer in 1977, when citizens of Brazil would report strange lights in the sky, and they wouldn't only report sightings of these lights, they were said to have been attacked by these lights. So this incident happened in the city of Colares, Brazil, where residents would claim to see these strange lights in the sky, and shortly after, they felt like they were being burned, and some residents would say that they even felt like their blood was being drawn. Residents would shortly call these lights in the sky chupa chupas, or sucking. Quite strange if you ask me, but that's literally what they did to them, as some residents, as I said previously, had their blood drawn from these lights. What was even more strange about these burn attacks was that there was traces of radiation found in the wounds. The residents of Colares would grow helpless, and they would attempt to ward off the UFOs by lighting fireworks in the sky or huge bonfires late at night. And soon enough, the Brazilian Air Force did get involved. So the Brazilian Air Force was tasked with, what exactly is going on in the city of Colares, and are there actually people getting harmed by these UFOs in the sky? The Brazilian Air Force would later call this investigation Operation Saucer. They even have a 200-page document in their database and over 500 photos of these supposed UFOs, but most of it is held confidentially. Now I quickly want to show two sketches that were part of the confidential case that the Brazilian military had going. The first sketch shows what military personnel saw, and it basically looks like an UFO saucer, something you would typically see like in movies or cartoons. The second one does look a little different. It's what some officers reported. They saw UFOs flying into the coastal waters nearby. Not only did the Brazilian Air Force have those documents and photos, but they also had over 5 hours worth of videos about these UFOs. And what's even more interesting is that newspapers during the time would even cover these incidents, making this case really heavily documented. UFOologist Daniel Dias would go on to write a book about Operation Saucer. In this book, Extraterrestrial Vampires of the Amazon, he would say that numerous personnel from the Brazilian military would suffer from nervous breakdowns when investigating the UFOs in the sky. And despite the residents of Colares getting attacked and seeing these UFOs in the sky, the Brazilian military would go on to say that these attacks and these sightings are not related to UFOs in the sky. So what exactly were they? And now this is when the conspiracy comes in. I mean, there were people with attacks, these burn attacks, and they were shown to have traces of radiation from these burning attacks. So what else could it possibly be? Dr. Calvaro, who had treated many victims of the UFOs, would go on to say in an interview that she was told to lie to the victims by the Brazilian Air Force that what they had seen were not UFOs, but rather hallucinations. She would go on to say, how could people possibly believe that they all had the same hallucinations, of all the same sightings of the strange UFOs? No one would believe her if she had to keep telling all her patients they had all experienced the same hallucinations. It is a bit strange that the Brazilian Air Force would go on to denounce that UFOs ever having any connection to the residents of Colares being attacked. While there is some proof I want to say, that they were involved in some documents that are found in the Brazilian National Archive. And with that, Operation Saucer was closed. Now it's very obvious the Brazilian military really wanted everyone hush-hush about this whole entire incident. But what is even more strange is what happens to Captain Holland, who led Operation Saucer. In 1997, Captain Holland would go on to do an interview with UFOologists where he does acknowledge the existence of UFOs being involved in the city of Colares. And he says that he will be releasing his own documents and photos and evidence of this incident. But shortly after conducting this interview, he was found dead in his house. And here very quickly I will play a clip from that interview with Captain Holland, translated to English.
Objects were photographed. We detected at least 9 types of objects: probes, ships, flying saucer shapes, and one, the largest we saw, was shaped like a soccer ball, an American football. It was a very big object with lights or windows all around. At one point, it was close to us, about 70 meters away, and was about 100 meters long, very large, with a very high speed. It looked like a sun, which then dimmed and ascended. 4 films were made, about 400 or 500 photos. This material was kept by the Air Force. The officers and the photographs were sent to the Air Force Command in Brasilia, and they must be stored at the major state for the Air Force's intelligence services. The Air Force treats the UFO subject seriously.
Now, I can't 100% say that this is fact, but it was reported somewhere that Captain Holland would report his mentality and says that he never had a thought of unaliving himself. But it is a bit strange considering that he had just done this interview, and shortly after he was found dead in his house, supposedly from himself as he hung himself from a belt. So were the residents of Colares really attacked by UFOs? Or is it just some government ploy where they were testing out nuclear weapons? This whole entire incident remains a mystery. I mean, there is a lot of documents and actual photographs of victims who were attacked by the UFOs. Operation Saucer and what happened to the residents of Colares really remains a mystery. But what is so strange is that there is actual proof of the residents being attacked by these UFOs. And it is heavily documented, as I said. There were newspapers going around during the time saying that these UFOs were attacking people. Operation Saucer deserves its own video. But we'll be moving forward to our next incident of UFOs existing. And this incident would go on to inspire Brazil's first person shooter game. Now it's time to talk about the Varginha UFO Incident, which happened in the town of Varginha, Brazil. Now this isn't just one incident of a UFO encounter and sighting, but rather it's a series of incidents and sightings, with the most prominent being happening in January 20th, 1996, when 3 young girls were walking home, when all of a sudden they saw a strange alien-like creature walking in front of them. It was described as a brown, darkish skinned creature, and it was walking on 2 legs. But something interesting about the way they described it was that this alien's head had 3 bumps on it, and it looked like a crown. And one of the mothers from these 3 girls would go on to say that they met the literal devil. One of these 3 girls would go on to say in an interview while describing this alien, he was short, he was crouching, but he was short. I had the impression that it was something very soft, that it gave the impression that it was going to burst, with smooth skin and red eyes, that it looked at us. It was something like that. Quickly, you look at it and say, it's like this and that's it. And that's it. But there was no way that it was human, nor an animal. Now keep in mind, this translation is from Portuguese into English, and when translated back into English, it does sound choppy. The girls and several residents of Varginha would go on to call this creature the Varginha ET. But did these girls really see an actual alien in front of them? Well, the military and local police would go on to say something that would disprove their interaction with this alien. An official from the military would go on to say, "Oh, you guys didn't see an alien, but rather you saw the locally mentally ill homeless person, Modino. Surely this wasn't an alien. He just looks like an alien." But knowing the Brazilian military and its previous interactions with Project Saucer, could you really believe them here? Anyways, this one event just happened after a series of other related alien events in Varginha, and it made many people think that somehow these girls were just capitalizing off of these events that happened previously. And let's get into those events that did happen previous. January 13th, 1996. Just a week before the three girls had seen a Varginha ET, Carlos Souza was flying his aircraft when all of a sudden in front of him, he spots a UFO. It was in the shape of a cigar and it was nearly the size of a school bus. But something about this was interesting. It looked like this UFO was crashing and smoke was coming from it. So Carlos Souza decided to follow this UFO to its crash site. And when Carlos Souza did successfully reach the crash site of this UFO, he was met by military, telling him to get out of there and that he should leave immediately. Carlos Souza would later reappear at the crash site and gave an interview and recounted the events as it happened.
Esse pessoal militar, né, que era rapaz negro, alto, bem fortão.
And on the same day of January 13th, 1996, a military officer would attempt to capture an ET. Now this guy had no idea of what was going on. He was just following orders. And there was a huge military presence in Varginha. And supposedly what they were doing was transporting the crashed UFO and the aliens inside to a local university where they were conducting some sort of research on them. Now, Marco Cherez was driving his car when all of a sudden he sees an alien in front of him, possibly the Varginha ET everybody talks about in the Varginha town, and he attempts to capture it. He does so successfully, but what he wasn't doing, he wasn't wearing any protective equipment, and he grabs the alien barehanded, and this would have dire consequences. Now, before you ask, where exactly is the tinfoiled hat conspiracy theorist getting his information from, I will show some clips and I will link all of my sources down below. Anyways, Marco Cherez would go on to pass away. During his autopsy, it was said that he died due to generalized infection and pneumonia and bacteria, and we'll soon learn more about this. In a documentary by James Fox would attempt to go to Varginha. He does so successfully. But anyways, during his time in Varginha, he goes on to interview many key witnesses from the events of the Varginha UFO incidents. One of them being Dr. Joao Baptista, who has some interesting things to say about Marco Cherez's death. A quick correction, this interview doesn't actually come from James Fox documentary, but rather found on YouTube. I'll link it down below. Anyways, here's the clip.
Estão todos tratando de problema de ser alienígena. E o meu chamamento é para que havia outro ser junto. Tinha ser chamado ET e tinha uma bactéria que ganhou esse nome porque foram os resultados que se aproximaram do que existe aqui. Mas seguramente essa bactéria dispunha de recursos. Esse alienígena trouxe a bactéria de fora. Então, os colegas ufólogos devem procurar também saber sobre o segundo personagem do evento. Tem o personagem ET e tem o personagem, a bactéria da unha do ET.
During this interview with the doctor, he concludes that these aliens, these Varginha ETs, were carrying some type of alien bacteria on them, and that it was deadly once humans came into contact with it if they weren't wearing any protective equipment, such as Marco Cherez did. So that pretty much covers it for the main incidents that happened on January 13th, 1996. Now, several residents from the time of January 13th through January 20th, upon where the three girls had seen the UFOs, there were many residents of Varginha who would later go on to claim that they had too seen ETs or aliens in the town of Varginha. Some people will claim that these aliens attacked them, while some killed animals in the zoo. And what's kind of funny is that a woman would go on to say that she was impregnated by an alien, which is just absolutely false, as there was no evidence for it and it was just a claim. The reason I bring up these false claims is because there are a lot of skeptics online or in real life where they claim that the Varginha UFO incident was just fake. And the three girls did see the alien, or they claimed to see the alien, a week after the UFO had crashed. Now, a lot of people in Brazil would later go on to say that this was just some publicity stunt to garnish tourists to the town of Varginha, Brazil. And while there were people who were a little bit suspicious of this incident happening, there are many people too who believe that this did happen. And I kind of wanted to find out what exactly did the citizens of Brazil think of this event. So I went to the lovely place that is Reddit, and I did find a thread where OP asked, "Residents of Brazil, what do you think of the Varginha UFO incident?" Some comments did believe it happened, while some people just thought it was just some publicity stunt, as I said. And as I mentioned earlier during Marco Cherez's autopsy report, there is a guy who did a documentary on the Varginha UFO incident, where he goes to the town of Varginha and questions people on the streets and key witnesses from the events, whether or not this did happen. And that documentary is pretty interesting, and I'll link it down below where you can watch it. Okay guys, so I'm actually recording this video like multiple days in a row, and just very shortly, the town of Varginha now uses the alien encounters they had as a way to garnish tourists. They even have a water tower that's in the shape of a UFO saucer, and as well they sell many alien plushies. But enough of that, let's talk about Brazil's first FPS game that was inspired by the events that happened in Varginha. It is known in several different titles. One of the English titles is Alien Anarchy, or the Varginha Incident, or known in Portuguese, Incidente em Varginha. Now this game is really janky, and if you like janky games, you should probably check this one out. Anyways, let's get into the story of this game and kind of some of its gameplay. So this game came out in 1998, just 2 years after the Varginha incident. So this game follows as the Varginha incident is a FPS which mixes fact and fiction, exploring the real happenings in Varginha. Taking sides with the aliens, the player must fight the Brazilian military forces, trying to rescue captured aliens in their spaceship. Through the game, the player will discover that a whole underground city called Stone Drome was built in southeastern Brazil, where aliens and humans, secret agents, work together. While I didn't actually play the game, I watched the YouTuber Civi11 who played this terrible janky game, and I think he enjoyed it. Anyways, go check out his video. I'll leave a link to it in the description. And a quick fun fact about this game, that the US military would even supposedly use this game to train Delta Force soldiers. How credible is that claim? Well, I only found one article from a Brazilian website that states this, but it's still interesting to know that the Delta Force soldiers may have used this game to learn tactics that would actually be employed in the battlefield. Do I believe that? Maybe. Very, very, very much a possibility. And that is Brazil's first-person shooter game. If you want to check it out, I am sure there are some emulators that could emulate this game online. And maybe in a live stream I could play this game if anybody's interested in that. So in this video, we went through multiple incidents where UFOs were supposedly encountered and recorded of. While some incidents weren't as well documented, there were some incidents that were heavily documented, such as Operation Saucer, which is one of the most interesting cases I could find about UFOs existing, and it is a bit strange that a whole city was affected by these aliens, and there's actually proof of the citizens being harmed by these rays in the sky that left radiation. And it is a bit strange that the Brazilian military would go on to say that there was no foul play from UFOs. This whole speculation of Operation Saucer makes you wonder, was this actually the work of UFOs, or was it some type of test conducted by the military that used nuclear weapons? And finally, we had the Varginha incident in Brazil, where a lot of people do claim that this was a publicity stunt to garnish tourists to the town of Varginha, Brazil. But what we do know for a fact from the Varginha incident in Brazil is that this inspired Brazil's first first-person shooter game. While that is a milestone in its own right, the Varginha incident does have a lot of speculation to it. And that concludes today's video, guys. I really do hope you enjoyed this little deep dive into the history and lore of Brazil's many UFO encounters. Oh yeah, just to say, one thing is for certain. When it comes to UFO speculations, you should always hold suspicion on whether or not these encounters actually did happen. And make sure to conduct your own research before you do have your own answer. Anyways, make sure to like and subscribe if you did enjoy this content I did for this video. I'm kinda liking these deep dive videos. It's a lot of fun for me to make. And if I have people who subscribe and like these videos I do, it gives me more of an incentive to make it. And I do hope people actually click on this video because I did put a lot of work into this. And yada yada yada. I'll see you all later.